You see, I believe that rather than to try and say that our farm is about growing specific foods or just even about a farm, I think our farm grows community. And community, in its most empowered form, is a group of individuals like you who are following their bliss, following the passion that lights them up, following the thing that gets them to be fired up and that they're so excited to bring to the world. So why start a farm, right? Why, in my good conscience, have I started a farm? Well, here's the thing I'll tell you, right? I'm the kind of guy who loves to talk about the two ROI, the ROI of return on investment and the other ROI of ripple of impact. And I'm going to start with the other ROI, the ripple of impact piece, because that's really why I started the farm. It's really the movement inside of me that led me to get deeply involved in farming, in community building, and building ecovillage, because that's what we're doing. So that said, this story starts in 2012, April 1st, 2012, which is essentially 9 years ago, when I decided I had just had enough. I had just watched way too many documentaries. I had spent an entire year literally watching documentary after documentary after documentary for 52 weeks straight. And really it had gone on for even a little longer than that by the time I actually walked out onto the farm. And I knew that I had to do something. What I had recognized, what I was learning about, well, not farming, but more so about the world when it comes to storytelling in documentaries, is that they were spending 90 to 95% of the time talking about a problem, literally like sounding the alarm on climate change or peak oil or vanishing of the bees or all the challenges we're facing in overfishing and food and deforestation. And I mean, you can make your head spin with how much information you can learn from a documentary. And yet there was so little energy put into the solution. So little of that was talking about the actual solution that we can embody over time. And so, you know, one stat that really shocked me in this one moment, it was in 2011, I was kind of researching and I opened up Google and it was blinking in front of me. I had no idea what I was going to type in. So I start typing in, if everyone lived, and the autocomplete was like the average American, right? Okay, sounds interesting. Click on that. And this research paper that had come out in 2011 was showing the carbon footprint, not the carbon footprint so much as the global footprint of what it would take for everyone to live like the average American if everyone in the world lived like the average American. And what that showed, you know, there was a bunch of different countries, but what it showed for America was that we would need 4.1 planets if everyone were to live like the average American in the planet today. And I was like, well, damn. But I'm Canadian, so I was like, yeah, well, that's bad. But America consumes a ton. I mean, they're the biggest purchaser, they're the biggest economy, all that stuff. There's millions and millions of people there, and they just kind of like buy everything, right? So we're in Canada, like it has to be better than that, right? So I type in average Canadian, and the answer for the average Canadian was 5 planets. Yeah, right? So you start,
disappointing.
I mean, yes. So you start to kind of think about and feel through the emotion of, well, wait a second, that's me, right? If everyone lived like me, we would need 5 planets to survive. Now, why is Canada worse than America? I think it's because of these numbers are calculated on a per capita basis. And at the end of the day, we still need the same amount of roadways, the same amount of, you know, electricity running from spanning the entire length of our country that is Canada is so massive. And we have much higher heating bills, you know, food being produced and shipped from all over the globe. So there's so many other layers of carbon footprint that fall into why Canadians have such a high standard of living, but also such a high footprint. Right? And I think it was the Global Footprint Network was the name of the study. And I don't know if they've come out with another one since, but those were the numbers in 2011. And I can imagine that today it's only gotten worse. And so in what was essentially a giant fit of a fuck you to the system, a giant kind of feeling incredibly small while watching documentaries, a sense that everything was crumbling, that, you know, we were in some level of doom and gloom and the sky was falling. And that invoking in me a large sense of anxiety, a huge, overwhelming sense that, everything is going to collapse and that my life is going to collapse, systems are going to collapse, ecosystems are going to collapse even more so, and we just can't keep living this way. And so that deeply depressed me, and it put me into a state where either I was going to die, and I say that, not to be dramatic, but really to express how I felt at that time, or I was going to do something about it. And I knew that I couldn't change the world in a single action or a single day or a single moment. But what I could do is dedicate myself to making and taking on a giant experiment. And so I walked out in the middle of a GMO corn and soya field, planted a tree, and declared I would build a school I wish I could have gone to physically and digitally, and a community I wish I could have grew up in physically and digitally. And that physical component was really what I was focused on, is now known as Valhalla. And it first started, it was called the Valhalla movement. In fact, when it first started, it was actually called Project Y, right? Because I was running my name of my marketing agency, and my marketing company is called Y Simply Because Media, or WSB Media, because we live in Quebec and I have to not use English words in my title. But that said, Y Simply Because Media, so it was Project Y. It was just me trying to figure out what it took to live more sustainably and what it would take to build a movement. And I had been inspired by a couple of things that are on the ROI, return on investment side of things, and I'm going to get to that a little bit later. But I really want to express to you that I walked out in the middle of this cornfield and I started planting trees and laying around soil and like digging ponds and doing stuff and learning words like permaculture and earthships. And, I had never built anything in my life. I never planted anything in my life. I've never cooked anything in my life. Okay, well, I maybe cooked something in my life, but I knew nothing about food. I knew nothing about growing food. I knew nothing about building. I knew nothing about building community in this way. I knew absolutely nothing. It was worse than knowing nothing because I was a spoiled brat. And maybe I still am, but I was, very much in a fortunate position as kind of a 23-year-old getting involved in a project like this. It took some level of naive thinking that maybe this could change the world. And so I learned about a couple of very interesting ideas. And the first idea was, well, look, we're cutting more trees than we're planting, and that's a huge problem. So why don't I start by planting trees? But I had also learned about other interesting notions like Dunbar's number, for example, which is a study that was done on Native American tribes. I can't remember which specific tribes or whatever it was, but the point is that they were studying the scale of tribes. It's the scale that tribes would get to before that they would start to break down and subdivide into smaller tribes, and what the ideal tribe size was, mainly from the perspective of scaling trust. And that's what the Valhalla movement is about. It's really about scaling trust within ourselves, within our community, within people that we know, and rallying community to build a 150-person ecovillage. Now, why 150 people? Well, because Dunbar's number. Dunbar's number was where these tribes would start to break down because they could not trust one another at the scale that they wanted to, because you can only maintain a certain amount of really close, deep connections and relationships, right? There's only so many people you can talk to or relate with or chat with before you start to feel like they're, in a sense, a stranger, or they're outside of your immediate circle in some way, shape, or form. And therefore, you start to operate with everything at arm's length. That's why we need lawyers. That's why we need accountants. That's why we have bank accounts and vaults and, security for all kinds of different things. We can't trust everyone. And it's not because people aren't trustworthy. I think many people are trustworthy, specifically trustworthy within their own circles sometimes, right? Like somebody could be a highway robber but never rob their family because that's their tribe. But we're all living our own experience, and we're all in some level of fight or flight and in some level of consuming because that's the system we grew up in, right? I learned where money came from, for example, and that changed my life. I learned that we had more debt than there is money, and yet we're the inventors of money. So how is it possible that we have more debt than money? That doesn't make mathematical sense. In fact, it's a giant game of musical chairs. And so that, coupled with the fact that we were in this growth, ever-growing paradigm of we need to grow, GDP. Everything is about scale. everything is about more, more, and more, and more, and we never have enough. I wanted to know what it was like to build an experiment where we had enough, where we can scale to this 150-person number, right? And sometimes maybe go a little higher, and as the tribes did, they would get a little bit bigger. Then there would start to be problems over months, years, whatever. Then they would break off into smaller groups and then eventually build back up to that 150 number and continue to grow their little village. So this is an experiment in building a village. That's what the Valhalla movement is. Valhalla is a name derived from Norse mythology. Norse meaning Vikings. If you watched Thor, Marvel movies, or whatever it is, you maybe heard the term Valhalla before, right? It's referring to a great hall in the land of Asgard. The land of Asgard is this kind of mythical land where the Vikings, honorable Vikings, would go in the afterlife. Men and women that fought an honorable life or lived an honorable life or fought an honorable battle or died in war or whatever it is, right? They would go to Valhalla to train for the Battle of Armageddon, essentially to train for the battle of good versus evil. And so that's where we derived the name. Now, the name comes from the fact that we believe it was a really great name to be said in multiple languages all around the globe, both in French and English as well here in Quebec. That's very important. But it's also, it brings back this kind of sense, this feeling that we were setting sail away from lands that we knew into lands unknown. And I believe, and I think there's, a strong case for the fact that Vikings probably did discover Iceland and Greenland and probably even Canada and North America before the traditional story of what we hear about, the discovery of North America with Christopher Columbus and whatever it is, right? And obviously there was natives here and stuff, so somebody had discovered America before the Western culture, blah, blah, blah. We discovered America, right? But the point is, I think that the Vikings, had a very interesting ethos, and I believe that our farm and the community we're building at our farm is designed to take on this experiment of living a sustainable life, an off-grid life of sorts, while connected to the grid, right? I see Valhalla as this bridge. It's almost like a giant sandboxer, where we get to play in the dirt 20 minutes away from downtown Montreal on an 80-plus acre field, right? GMO corn and soy, like we're talking Monsanto stuff here, and turn that into a 30-home, roughly 150-person community. And turn that into a real-life Eden, a real-life Valhalla. By building a community center at the center, a wellness retreat center, an outdoor kitchen, a bistro, kind of our version of a conscious Starbucks, producing our own food, producing our own community in every single way, producing our own power through solar panels, like having our water could be caught from rainwater and well water, having all of the inputs come from right there. And having all the people that we hire and work with being a part of our community as an integral form of community building. And it comes with the adage of, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it takes a village to build a village. And what I mean by that is, like, if you're going to build a village, you need to find the village. And you need to rally the village around particular ideas and thoughts. And so the core principle when we first launched the Valhalla movement, which is, in 2012, it was literally a field with nothing, a field that was barren. It had nothing growing in it. It was Monsanto, sprayed pesticides, chemicals, whatever, for more years than I would like it to have ever been sprayed by. And we had to deal with that soil and build from that place and that soil and that space to learn the principles of things that we ended up learning, like words that I ended up learning specifically, like permaculture, and now what they call regenerative agriculture, market gardening, all of these things. And so I could go into the definitions of those. I can go into the philosophies of those different components. But it really is that experiment that drove me, right? The existential crisis meets this, like, why don't we do something about it? So I walk out in this field. I plant that tree. And then people just started showing up. In fact, my first ever Instagram post is on me in a tractor on the farm. And then soon after, it's me doing a bunch of, helping bottle vinegar that I had made with my father. It was me on the farm planting trees. It was me building a pond or doing all kinds of crazy things. And so even the world into storytelling for me, I think really began with this farm, right? It's the first consistent story that I've been telling for 9 years now and that have developed over time. And I'm taking this story right now and I'm telling you it in pieces, and I'm kind of trying to break the pattern a little bit to express elements of the vulnerability of what it took for me and so many others to join in. Because when we started the farm, there was nothing. It was flat. And so we went out and dowsed, and dowsing, I did not believe this was working at all, right? It's like we're going up, holding on to 2 metal sticks and then trying to see when they're going to cross naturally, because the force of nature and water running through veins under the earth would let you know where to dig your well or where to dig a little pond. I never even heard of that concept, and all of a sudden we're doing it. And I'm walking out there barefoot, and like the soil's all shitty and rocky and like, it would hurt. It was not fun. But then I went to the garden center. I told them that their website sucked, and I wanted $50,000 worth of trees and clover seeds and a bunch of other stuff, bags of earth, whatever it was, right? And we just started planting. We started doing things, and we started royally messing up a bunch of stuff. Like we ended up having a flood, and we had planted a bunch of lavender, and lavender doesn't like water, but I didn't know that. So we lost hundreds of lavender. We lost a bunch of fruit trees to rotting or all kinds of different challenges. We had all kinds of things lay its way in our path. But to me, this farm is an experiment because I don't really know the outcome, and I'm inventing the outcome alongside you. And I say you because I feel like if you're listening to this, you have something innate inside of you that says you want to be a part of this too. You want community in your life. You want to live in a sustainable way that isn't impacting or taking more than what you're giving. You probably want to eat healthy foods and live a healthy lifestyle. You want to know where your food comes from and recognize and understand the faces of those people. You want to know that even if you eat meat, it's coming from a sustainable way, or eggs, like we have chickens at our farm and we make eggs every single day, or we don't make the eggs, the chickens make the eggs, but we clean them and package them and deliver them to coffee shops and restaurants all over, right? I hand them out to my neighbors. Well, all of those things, you want to know where that comes from. You want to have a connection to nature, to the sacred that is Mother Gaia, if you want to call her that, or Mother Nature, and the feminine that comes with that, but also the kind of the masculine energy of structure and building and creating in a way that to me is a form of art. The way I see it is I'm performing a giant ritual of Google Earth art, a giant like death and rebirth cycle, not only through the seasons and following of the seasons, particularly here very pronounced in Canada, as I don't need to tell you, but also developing this farmland into a very different way of life, a private community where people who are intentionally picked come together with intentional values to make that happen. So what's our core value? Well, we like to call it freedom culture, to empower and encourage all individuals to spread their unique gifts to the world. You see, I believe that rather than to try and say that our farm is about growing specific foods or just even about a farm, I think our farm grows community. And community, in its most empowered form, is a group of individuals like you who are following their bliss, following the passion that lights them up, following the thing that gets them to be fired up and that they're so excited to bring to the world. So whether that be like being a nutritionist or planting herb and medicinal gardens, whether that be because you're an accountant and you really love just dealing with the numbers and helping people out who are doing other things, whether that means you're the type of person who wants to grow food or engineer and install solar panels, or you're the type of person who wants to, I don't know, even if you're a mechanic, we want to scale your passion. And I want to empower and enable the inner entrepreneur inside of you, the inner, freelancer or creator or influencer inside of you that sets you ablaze and sets you on a path of self-reliability and self-sustainability. Because that's what self-sustainability means to me, right? We used to talk about sustainability, community, knowledge, and action. Those were our 4 pillars. And as I learned about sustainability, what I recognized is that sustainability was kind of not sexy. That we needed to shift and change from the idea of sustainability into thriving. And so that's the foundation that created this very podcast. the online school that is Superhero Academy. That's the foundation upon which everything that I am doing today is actually coming to life. It's the place where I go every single week and start telling stories and tell the same story over and over and over again. It's where I learned about storytelling and social media marketing and management, where I started making memes and posting on Instagram and Facebook. You know, our Facebook page has, 70,000+ followers or whatever it is. Our Instagram, 22,000, our YouTube, 24,000. We have hundreds of videos, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. I mean, I don't even know how many videos we have here, right? But there's videos, everything from like going to the Paris climate talks to making Kickstarters that we raised money for, to building Earthships. I went down to Ushuaia and made a documentary called Recipe for Change, where we build an Earthship on the southern tip of Argentina. We also built one on our farm. I mean, these are videos about growing hemp or installing solar panels, electric bikes, growing loofahs, growing food, interviews, podcasts. I mean, look at some of these old podcasts that I had, with everything from soil biologists to entrepreneurs to, Rob Greenfield, who does amazing things in the world and ate dumpster diving for months or whatever it was. He wore his garbage on him and lived like the average American, and wore every piece of garbage that he consumed for 30 days on his body. And he had like these big bags and stuff. I mean, we did all kinds of ways. This project has brought me and many all around the globe, researching and visiting ecovillages, understanding and learning what makes ecovillages fail, what makes farms fail, what about permaculture and how do they make money? How can this actually generate the change that we need to look and feel? And that can't just be from the feel-good story of sustainability. It has to come from thriving. It has to come where the ROI of return on investment and the ROI of ripple of impact actually merge. And so this experiment led to us telling stories, to us making content in many different ways. And so, Valhalla's Instagram is only now starting to reflect elements of what is actually happening at the farm. But for many months, years, time, we started sharing some stories. Like this is, Travis or some other people. We were making memes and creating content. Our logos shifted and changed over time. I mean, there's all kinds of storytelling that we were doing. And this is a picture, of the farm, I think, in the beginning of 2016 season. It was only in 2016 that we actually started to really gain momentum, where people were there working full time. In 2015 was the first year where we actually were showing up every single Saturday, when I decided that church was kind of every Sunday. So, of course, building a farm should be too. I feel like I can talk forever about this topic. But what I want you to know is that it's also an experiment in scaling generosity and abundance. Growing community and making this all happen, and I'll get again to the ROI of why I think this makes financial sense for people to do and consider. Also, to me, is a form of giving. This feels like I'm giving back. This is my version of spirituality. This is my version of connection. This is my version of doing something that is bigger than me. This is my version of planting a tree that I will never sit in the shade of. My version of building legacy. My version of building something that matters to me. And I think it's the version of many other people who feel like me. And that's why we call it a community. It's not about what I am doing. Just because I started the project doesn't mean it's my project. And much of my pain with this project has been to try and deprogram and convince people, which I no longer do. I just tell people at this point that this really is about we and us. That this community, that all the feelings and experiences, most of what they even see at the farm, most of the things planted at the farm, were not planted by me. They were not grown by me. They were not planted by me. Yes, I stewarded elements of it. And I've become really good at managing that and understanding the talents of others, understanding the superpowers of others. That's why I created Superhero Academy, because that was my skill set as a marketer. And more on that in a second. But the point is that I was just there to watch the ecosystem grow. And just like in permaculture, most of what permaculture is based on is about mimicking nature, biomimicry of sorts, right? And what that means is that in nature, things tend to grow with one another symbiotically. Like, for example, tomatoes, asparagus, and basil love to grow together because they also take different nutrients out of the soil. They restore nutrients that each other like. They kind of repel the pests of each other. And they taste really great in an Italian dish. At None Does on Sunday. Kyla likes that one. But there is a way that nature has embarked on some level of wisdom. And that wisdom for me is found in some level of connection and continuous working with the land, with the inputs, and with the community around us, the people who drive by and drop off wood chips, the people who are like, hey, do you guys need some extra rock? And they just drop off a bunch of rock, or the type of people who are making me feel like I'm playing a giant game of Settlers of Catan. Because that's kind of what it is. And year after year after year, we've gotten better. I've gotten better at telling stories. I've gotten better at being more humble about what is really happening, how much of it I'm doing and how much of it I'm just witnessing, how much of it is flowing through me and for others. And I have been testing elements and theories of this, building it as a nonprofit foundation at first, then as a co-op, which is one person, one vote, and scaling the farm and doing CSA baskets, which are community-supported agriculture baskets, meaning we grow the food, you pay for the basket for the season, and then every week you get a basket full of all the veggies that are fresh from the farm that week. And I say veggies, but it could also be eggs or other things too. And so this is an experiment that stretches every part of me. It demanded me to understand social media and storytelling, and it demanded me to have in-person presence and be able to speak. It makes me this storyteller that you are and see today. It made this podcast. It made me understand how to work with nature and how to work with others, how to do conflict resolution. And all of that has made me a more generous man. Realizing that I'm not going to my grave with my money. I'm not going to my grave with my memories or all the things that I've accumulated. I'm going to my grave with a legacy. And that legacy for me is something that I just want to leave this place better than I found it. I want to take that carbon footprint that, if everyone lived like me, we would need 5 planets, and shrink that down to another scale. I want to do my part in building a world that I wish I could live in, the world that I know is possible in my heart, as somebody like Charles Eisenstein would say, which was a book that very much informed us. And the principles of things like the gift economy and sharing and building an economy, I think are playing out more and more and more. The technology of electric vehicles, of solar panels, and a generation of regenerative agriculture and sourcing materials and inputs from closer to home as we see prices of wood and everything skyrocketing at this day and age in 2021. All of those principles are starting to go in the direction of what I knew was happening 9 years ago. And I still know is happening today. And so my superpower is to understand and see the macro trends, and in the micro, learn how to be more generous. Learn how to give and to trust, how to invest in community, invest in relationships. This project has cracked me open and broken me down so many times. I've watched trees get bulldozed that we planted. I've watched trees die through floods or all kinds of things. I've watched buildings we built get flooded. I've watched myself and others make so many mistakes. We've had vandals. We've had people call us Nazis. We've been called a cult. We've been called everything you can name of. And it's none of that. But maybe it is to them. And I respect that. But for me, this is a move in the right direction. A move in a direction that I know is important to me and in part of my mission. And so telling these stories and making this podcast and even doing all of this stuff, it's difficult to do alone. But there are things that motivated me in this direction. And part of those are community-based, and part of those are financially based, so that I can find a way to continuously invest in this and do that perpetually, just like we would in permaculture. How can I turn the ecosystem and the spend or the burn of what I'm creating? How can I take life and death and allow that cycle to endlessly be a loop? How can I find that abundance within myself, my business, as an entrepreneur, as a storyteller, as somebody who's creating, and create for more than me, but for everyone around me? And so personally, I want to create 150 jobs, or 149, with one for me. And that's challenging. I don't know if you've ever been an entrepreneur, or if you've ever created or hired anyone or worked with people, and to do that in a way where you're trying to evoke the artistry out of people, not just hiring them for what they can do or what their job title is on LinkedIn, but instead hiring them for what they actually really want to do, which tends to be much more in line with freedom, financial freedom, but also kind of emotional freedom and kind of the expression of what actually a good friend of mine, Ryan Schwartz, would call full expression, the full expression of their gifts. That's difficult. That requires mentorship. That requires space and time. That requires me to be the teacher and the student. And that's a forever process. There's no destination to this process. But there are some check marks along the way.